We've got Wendy 3 times tonight.
What's that?
We've got Wendy 3 times tonight. She's ready.
Super pumped.
Now she's got backup.
That's right. 29:21.
You got plenty of time.
Plenty of time. 35 seconds.
Exactly.
Besides, I tweaked my back playing like 10 racquetball games, so I got muscle relaxers. So if I look a little cloudy or it's
A regular meeting of the budget. May we have a roll call, Doug?
Commissioner Jesse,
Here.
Commissioner Marin,
Here.
Chair Castle,
Here.
Commissioner Woodham,
Here.
Commissioner Samples.
Here.
And absent is Commissioner Allen and Commissioner Sherbin.
Thank you. Next, if you would please stand, we'll salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next on the agenda is to approve the order of agenda for tonight. Do I have a motion to?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next on the agenda, are there any blue folder items, Doug, tonight?
There's no blue folder items.
Okay. Next, we have our consent calendar. F1 is the approval of the affidavit of posting for the regular Budget and Finance Commission meeting for March 14th.
Move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Next on the agenda, we have excluded consent calendar items. Do we have any of those, Doug?
No, nothing for that.
And do we have any public participation on non-agenda items?
Currently, no, there are no Zoom participants and there are no e-comments.
Thank you. That brings us down to item I, any items continued from previous agendas, which I don't believe there are any. And next are items up for discussion prior to action. Tonight we have our pension information follow-up and the commission referral from Wendy Colazzo, our finance director.
Good evening, Wendy Colazzo, Finance Director. Just to kind of preempt what we're going to do today, as you recall, this was the matter in which the committee requested that we outline pension liability from kind of payment to obligation and explain the whole process in a little bit more simplified way. So this is a presentation, and our Assistant Finance Director, Stephanie, she will be handling it today, and I'll be running a deck for you, and we'll answer any questions you may have along the way. And so I'll let her take it away.
As soon as I get this turned on, one meeting, I'm going to, oh, it's on, okay. So good evening, Chair Castle, Commission members. As you'll recall, as Wendy just said, at our last meeting, to review the financial statements, the Commission had asked us to provide a little bit more information about the pension information in our financial reports, and specifically to kind of try and help navigate what happened to the city's large pension payment in all of this. So I hope these will clarify this information, including where we're able to see the impact of that payment. So I think for any of these discussions, it's important to start with the timing. Again, as we saw in our last meeting, our fiscal year 22-23 ACFR shows a large reduction in the city's net pension liability, again, due to this 2021 pay down. The reason we're seeing it now and not earlier, as we might have expected, is just because of the measurement date of the data that we use for this report. And this is just related to the timing of when we receive the actuarial report, when we're putting together the data for the ACFR, and when, we finally are able to bring it to this committee. Similarly, in fiscal year 21-22, when we may have expected to see this payment because the city had just put a lot of resources towards this, again, that report used data from the fiscal year ending 2020. So again, we're not able to see the impact yet in our financial reports. Yes, go ahead.
A question.
Sure.
One of the confusing things about dealing with CalPERS is their 2-year delay or
Yep.
2-year look back. Do we know why they use 2-year data? I mean, the data that they use to calculate this, when they would calculate it at the beginning of a fiscal year, they have the data for the prior fiscal year. So I was reading over this today, and it struck me as strange that they use 2-year-old, they
So-
go back 2 years to get that calculation.
So I think the 2 years is a bit misleading, and I actually noticed an error I had made in the slides that we sent you. So you'll notice on here, I did not update it. So it says 2021 and 2020. It should actually say 2022 and 2021. So that is my error, and I just added confusion to this whole confusing item. The difficulty and why we often say it's 2 years behind is that we use data from so we get a report in July 2023. That report sets our rates, our contributions, our unfunded accrued liability for 24-25, and it uses data from 21-22. So at any point when we're dealing with this data, we're kind of going across 3 fiscal years. So in next fiscal year, 24-25, our contributions for UAL, for our ongoing payments, are based on this 2022 data. Does that make sense? I don't know that I've clarified it, but
Yeah.
does that answer that question?
Yeah, okay.
I think when they're putting the information together, again, it is the most recent full year of data that they have available. It's just by the time it gets through to, the city's planning, it's just much farther behind.
Yeah, if I can clarify that, I think that is exactly why they use 2 years, because just like budget is an art form, their projections and estimates are not based on actual reflections at that time, but they need a larger data set a larger time of data set to set their estimates. That's what I was told from our CalPERS guys, some of the reasoning behind the industry practice of that. It's the data set, the amount of data that they have collected versus the actual that has occurred. That's just an industry practice that they do.
And this is true across actuarial reports, I believe. So it's not just that we only get CalPERS data this way. This is true of our OPEB data. I believe it's other actuarial reports as well.
Okay.
Don't they update it every quarter? Or just once a year?
We get valuations once a year.
Once a year.
Forward. So again, just starting back with our prior year, our fiscal 21-22 ACFR, although they didn't note our large payment as a reduction to net pension liability, they do recognize and call specifically out these large contributions that the city made. You can see our $70 million and $155 million payments here. And they do note, again, in 21-22, that you'll be able to see them, decision makers, the public, will be able to see this impact fiscal year ending 22-23, which we just saw. And our financial reports have the same statement every year, whether our payments are, over 200 million or not. Again, I think they're trying to explain that the data is as of a point in time, and that there are further contributions the city's made that they're showing elsewhere in the deferred inflows and outflows. But then in the following fiscal year, they'll recognize the impact to the pension liability.
Question about the reports. Are these reports that we get from CalPERS, I mean, the format, this actual slide, is this a CalPERS slide? Or is this?
This is from our actual ACFR, from our annual financial report.
Okay. I find, I don't know about anyone else, but I get a report like this and I read it on the screen, but I like to print it off and make notes on it. And this is impossible to print. I print it and I lose part of the page. Is there a way we could get around that?
We have the ACFR in electronic format that it's already format that you can print the page, for this. So you shouldn't have any trouble. And also, if I could further just kind of, remember these decks are going in hopefully a timeline for you, right? The first deck was to explain to you, the reporting period and what are the measurements. This one now is tying, if I can simplify, the accounting, right? That because the mentality is we gave a check, where's it at, right? And it does not happen like that in the accounting reporting for the period up to June 30th. So your deferred inflows and outflows are just that, they're deferred. They're not yet booked. They're not in record just yet. So it's inbound, whether it's going out as a payment or coming in as a dollars in. So just kind of trying to define that. So this is exactly what happens. So we haven't expensed or booked that in just yet until the ACFR. So that's kind of the terminology as you see it there that we want to explain to you, because everybody thinks, oh no, where's my payment? We paid it. CalPERS didn't recognize it. Did they take it? They did not. It's the reporting and the recording of those transactions. We've recorded it in deferred outflows and inflows at the time, and now the expense actually happened as the auditors noted it would when the following period came. So we recognize the payment in the sense of deferred inflow and outflow, and now we're just recording the expense, the final piece of the transaction.
Let me ask a little bit different question. When we paid CalPERS $226 million, did we zero out our obligation as of that moment?
Did we zero? Yes.
We did.
Yes.
So all the numbers that we're talking about are just accounting issues, but bottom line, at some point, 2 years in the future, even though this happened 2 years ago, we're going to find out that we don't have any unfunded liabilities as of that date.
As of that time period, that's correct. The payment went in, you brought it down exactly what the payment was for. Now remember that $220+ million, all of it was not your pension liability. You had bond proceeds, you had administrative costs, those breakouts. You've seen them before. This committee's been presented and you were presented when the bonds were issued, right? Just want to be clear with that. But yes, apple to apple.
No, I'm just purely talking about, we wrote a check to CalPERS.
Yes, sir.
Is there going to be a place where, because you say everything that they do is 2 years in arrears, that was done in 2021, this is 2024, that's 3 years ago. Does that mean in July, we're going to see a big goose egg in our pension liability to CalPERS?
You will not see an official, you meaning everything's netted out in zero? No, because of the reporting period, absolutely not. Because as you can tell, they're telling you there, the measurement data of the 7 million to 155, right? The reduction was reported in your financials in 22 as a deferred outflow. But now what we're recording is the expense, the actual payment of it. Both get you the same thing. So to say this, the payment was made and your payment nilled out what you owed, yes. But reporting wise, you'll never see a zero because the reporting period does not land like that.
So
But it did occur.
The reporting period takes into account a whole year.
A whole year.
So our payment was a point in time when we zeroed that amount out, but that didn't remove our, existing employees with our existing commitments, with our ongoing contribution into the investment fund and the investment returns. So at a moment in time, it zeroed out, but from that, this just continues, it's a continuing ongoing calculation. So what you'll see, and I think we can move forward, is what we've seen kind of going through is the impact of this, right? So we never got to see the zero, we got to see less.
Okay, maybe I'm being kind of dense on this, but my understanding of unfunded liability is this is how much it would take in order to pay all the old bills. And then from that moment forward, this is how much you need to pay in order to cover the current bills. And somehow those two seem to be being conflated, and I don't understand that. Am I missing something?
Yeah, you're in the ballpark, right? But your unfunded liability is exactly that, what is not funded, right? At that moment in time, the city of Redondo Beach, before making the payment, was at about 72% funded, right? 72 to 73 within that ballpark. If you see that change, when you made that payment, you are now funded at 92 to 93% funded because you added people, your labor kept, as you add people to more liability, right? And that wasn't factored at the time of that. So that's the continual. So you're right. At the moment that happened, yes, your unfunded liability was X. You guys made a payment. That cleared it. But you still had circulating everything else that you owed. You reduced it, or increased how much funding you had. Now you're funded at 90, like I said, a higher amount, right? But you continue to add people, labor, results, people, you continued to staff, which added contributions continued on. So it's a cyclical calculation. It just doesn't stop, right?
Okay. All right.
Let me ask a couple of questions following on Mel's. I understand that we're looking from the beginning of fiscal 22 of FY22 to the end of FY22. But there are a couple of things I don't understand about that. There's a category here called contributions from employer. And that total for the miscellaneous and the safety groups is $227.7 million. Is that reflective of most of the actual cash that we borrowed and paid to CalPERS?
Yes.
Yes.
So we didn't make any normal payments that year, right?
We made normal payments too.
I mean,
Yeah, we made
That's why
normal
it's
payments
27.
too.
We only-
Yeah.
pardon?
You made normal payments as well.
But how much were the normal payments?
Probably 290.
I don't see them. I don't see them in the spreadsheet, do I?
You gotta subtract out the 225 minus the fees.
Yeah,
So,
but
because it's 227, so we probably made $2 to $3
it's
million.
more than 5 or 10 million, isn't it?
The normal cost, I'd have to look.
Yeah, I have to look at
It
these.
is
Hold
only
on.
five.
Somewhere.
5 million, 5 million, 7 million? Okay.
So yeah, that would be the sum of our ongoing normal cost contributions plus any additional unfunded accrued liability payments.
But then the other thing I don't understand here is the top line, the balance, the net of the addition of the safety and miscellaneous. The top category is the last column is the net liability. So the combination of miscellaneous and safety should come close to our 225 million of UAL when that year started, correct? Because at the end of fiscal, we didn't do the bond issue until July
Of
of 21, so we were in fiscal 22. So the UAL at the end of fiscal 22 should have been close to that 225 million, which is the bond issue that we did.
Your measurement date was 6/30/2021.
Right.
Your
That's-
payment
that's-
went-
That's when this starts, right?
Right.
6/30/20, the top.
So your total liability at that time, your total pensionable liability was $232 million, right? Then what you had included was B, right? I mean, A minus B, right? So now we're subtracting out contributions.
Wait, where'd you get 200, I don't see 232 million.
A,
That's the total.
at the top left-hand corner of the
Okay,
first
got it,
slide.
Got it.
So 232 million is what your total pensionable liability was. And then now you start subtracting B, which includes contributions from the employer at 70,759,000, right? $1.3 million, $1.4 million from contributions from the employees. There's your payments, all the contributions that are done, right, through the period. And then that net investment income, which was a reduction of 18.8. And then benefit payments out, that includes refunds to employees, contributions, so anything we paid out. So that took,
Pardon me for interrupting, but you're going through the transactions that occurred during
That year.
fiscal
That year.
22. I'm talking about the top line, which is the end of fiscal 21. That's when we should have shown 225 million somewhere as net unfunded liability. the UAL,
So,
and I don't see that here.
and the reason that you don't see that is that these are two different measurements.
Yep.
So net pension liability is not the same as unfunded accrued liability. Total the net pension liability is the way that, that according to GASB 68, I think I'm saying this right, Wendy? According to GASB 68, this is how cities report their pension liability in a financial plan. CalPERS actually has a different actuarial statement for cities to use to calculate this liability because it's different than the unfunded accrued liability. And I think I put this a little bit later in the slide deck, but this is an additional confusion between these two items, is that our calculation for our financial plans and in our valuation they're going to be different numbers. And it
Okay.
doesn't mean that they're two sets of books. It just means what we calculate for our financial report it's not the same thing and it's not serving the same purpose.
Okay, well, from a non-accountant's point of view, this is damn confusing because I'm looking for something that foots to the 225 million that we were in the hole for. And I thought liabilities minus assets would give me that.
So we
But it
can
doesn't.
definitely put that summary together for you, just straight from the CalPERS actuarial valuation. It actually does that in great, probably to most people, unnecessary detail. So we can do that, but
I think that'd be helpful in addition. I mean, this is clearly accurate data, but it's confusing because I was looking for something else. And so if you could supply that would be very helpful.
Yeah, and I think that's
I may
why,
have taken us down a rabbit hole. Maybe I should suggest that you finish your presentation and then we go back and figure out if there are holes or issues, because you might be covering some of these things in the rest of your presentation.
I think we are, but also I just want to note that this is why this was instrumental, right? Because thank you for pointing out that accounting is one of the most confusing things because everybody wants to be an accountant, right? And we think of 1 + 1 is 2, right? But debits and credits in the reporting period is quite a different animal. And I think this is the objective of this, is to show you that the reporting is there. It's just not apples to apples, you know? So I'll move the slide for you.
Yep.
Okay, understood and appreciated. Thanks.
Sure, go ahead.
Do you have any data on how many people are receiving pension and how many are contributing to the?
Yes.
It is in your ACFR as well. Yes, sir.
Yep.
So we can provide that as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what the trend is. How many people are receiving pension? If that number is continually going to go up, then that could give you some idea of what the future 5-year projections could be.
Absolutely. We hope so. That would mean that they're retiring, so let's,
It only
and they
goes
stay
up
with us.
when people live longer after they retire.
That's right.
So this slide just shows the same set of tables, and I just wanted to point out something that, again, we've seen in other times that we've come before this commission to talk about our pensions, which is that unfortunately, although we made these huge contributions, you see these big decreases, you do not see a zero. And we still see, not huge, but positive numbers. And this is just to point out that the same table shows the investment losses. And I messed up my arrows on the first one. I apologize. It should point to this negative 18 million and the minus 32 million that Wendy discussed earlier. And those negatives there on the investment losses, that's the main, 90% of the reason that we don't see this closer to zero number that we were all hoping for.
That's because of the performance of the portfolio?
Exactly.
Correct.
So, I think, go to the next, I think you can go to the next slide. So again, this sort of covers some of the things that I mentioned, but basically we have two different numbers. We have the net pension liability in our ACFR, and we have our unfunded accrued liability that appears in our CalPERS valuation. And these are just different numbers. Our CalPERS valuation, that's the source data for all of this. And in terms of this commission, in terms of our budgeting, planning, that's really the numbers that we're going to look at. Those set our contribution rates. It determines the amount we owe. and it determines our unfunded accrued liability. And I found this pretty helpful one-liner in our valuation report that was very short and to the point, and just said that this is our definitive number and we can consider this as the city's debt. That's the unfunded accrued liability number in our pension. And I just included a note up here from our ACFR that specifically just calls out that these numbers are going to differ from what you might see in the actuarial valuation report. So although these are different calculations and different numbers, they're telling the same story for us. We see a large reduction to our pension following our 21 pay down, offset by CalPERS investment losses. And in both cases, we see that the reporting is lagging the payment. So you can move to that. So here's our two sets of numbers, just to make things even more clear. But again, as I just said, in both cases, we see these large reductions showing up in our most recent reporting. And again, if you look at the table on the right, you can see that our current balance as of our most recent report is this 42.5 million. This is our number that we have. This is the number that we are working with for our 24-25 budgeting. And the same report sets our rates and normal cost contributions for the upcoming fiscal year.
So this is the UAL for essentially 6/30/2023, the end of fiscal 22.
Yes,
End of
exactly.
fiscal 2023.
Exactly.
So it's gone from, it should have been close to zero at the time we did the bond issue. Do we know what the increase was through the end of FY22? I mean, it'd be interesting to see an annual step up or step down in that UAL. This is a 2-year change.
No, this is a one-year
One-year
change.
change.
It's a one-year change. So again, the table on the right with the red. So I guess you can add up the numbers, the 44 plus the 118. That would have been our UAL in our report ending June of 2021. For the data ending in 2021 before it reflected our pay down, our July 2023 plan, which is again data through 2022, shows the lower numbers that reflect our pay down. Again, I don't know that in the valuation reports, you're necessarily going to see this $226 million number or, the number that we paid down. The reason for this is when we do something like a pay down, we don't necessarily have that point in time to know what our payment is. So we reach out to CalPERS, we say, hey, CalPERS, if we pay it off as of, as of today, and they'll do a calculation for us. So, we have the backup for that. I'm sure we have a report that includes those informations, but you're not necessarily going to see that number reflected in one of our evaluations. Because again, it's a point in time.
Okay, I'm getting a little more confused as we go through. Step back. Tell me what the UAL was, as we know it now, at the end of fiscal 21, 22, and 23. I'd like to know, so that question, do we have that data, those three figures?
We definitely do. You can, if you add up the 118 and the 44.9,
Call it 163, and it dropped down to 42.
Yeah. So that's our total UAL as of 6/30/21.
Right, it decreased 120 million.
So 163.4 million for 2021.
So at the end of
Yeah, it's about
2021,
163.
we owed 163 after we paid them 250.
Again, the $163 million calculation did not take into account that pay down. It did not reflect that pay down because of the timing of the payment.
Okay, well, that's what I'm looking for, is the exact balance of UAL at the end of each of those fiscal years.
So I think the issue is that, let's say July or June 30th, the UAL was X, and then we made a payment, call it July 15th.
Right.
But between July 15th and the next, at the end of that fiscal year, June 30th, we made that payment, but they also lost $32 million. So once all those numbers add in, that's why you don't see a statement as of July 31st. That's what you're looking for. We'd almost would say it was
June 30th, the end of the fiscal year. We should have a UAL. We had the UAL before we did the bond issue, historically for each year, at the end of each fiscal year. And
Yes, so for, yeah, again,
Let's let them finish the.
again, for,
This is, I think we need to get to the bottom before we. ask
Well, I'm
for-
not sure that that's correct, because if I get lost halfway through the darn thing, getting to the bottom,
no, we're fine, I'm fine with the questions and the stop, because, that way we don't have to go back, and we focus on it.
Let me do this, Wendy. If we called up CalPERS today, and we said, we're pulling our entire pension system out of CalPERS, how much does it cost? Can they give us a number?
Yes,
Yes,
they will do a calculation for us.
Okay.
They may
And they
act-
will give us a precise number, and they will never call us up again and ask for more money.
On that day, in that hour.
yeah.
Exactly. It's so again, our unfunded accrued liability. So we have two things. We have the estimated value of the benefits that we are going to pay out over time according to our plans. And then we have a target for the level of assets required to pay all of those benefits over time. The difference between those two numbers is our unfunded amount.
Right?
So when we pay off a point in time, we still have that target funding amount that's ongoing. So
Okay.
it's not that we paid off everything and we're not still accruing. We're not,
So the other side
we're
of my.
still accruing. We're
The other side
still,
of my question was
Yes.
going to be, if they can give us a precise number of dollars in time that we say we're leaving, and this is how much it costs, and they can give us that number, and we called them up the next day and we said, changed our mind, we want to add everybody back in, these are all of our people. We don't know anything for all of those people, and we add them back in. Do they tell us how much we owe for the new people that we just added in? Is that what you're telling us? Or do they start creating liabilities as of the day that they get added into the plan?
well,
That make sense?
I'm not totally sure that I'm understanding the question.
So we established that they can tell us how much it costs to get out.
Yes, at a point in
The
time.
flip side of the question is, can they tell us how much it costs to get in? Because I think that's what you're talking about here is, we drew a line in the sand and we said, we're paying things off. It should be zero as of this date. And now you're talking about the new liabilities, and they shouldn't be unfunded liabilities. They should be funded liabilities.
Exactly. It's a new commitment.
Yeah.
Where the additional liability comes in is
Right.
any time that our contributions are not equal to, anytime that our contributions are not equal to the amounts that are required to pay out. And essentially that happens when investments do not meet their targets or we have benefit plan changes.
And I think that's a big note on here. We're looking at things siloed, right? Net pension liability is the performance of your investments. That's one portion. Because the worst that the net investments do, the more we have to contribute. If not, there's only two other options. We pay more as an employer and contribute to cover the deficiency of our investments where they don't hit. Or we charge the employee more contribution because we got to get it from somewhere. So our goal is to make sure that our investment side of the equation performs. We would not be having this conversation if investments had performed, right? That's the reality. There's two parts of it, right? Where you got three sources of money to pay. The goal is to get it funded, right? But a portion of that, if investments in this case did not make it, the payment would have had a larger impact if investments on the other side, which is your other funding source, would have performed. But we look at it in siloed, right? Now, your ACFR, take another component, says if right now the business, the wheels fall off and somebody wants to buy us out, this is what they got to bring to buy us out at that point in time. With the performance we had on the investment side, all the money we contributed as an employer and the money the employees contributed. So all those factors work together, right? So I think, overall, if I'm gathering this correctly, the question that this committee wants to confirm is, did our payment get through and get recognized? I can tell you, yes, it was expensed on the year it was, and it was not only expensed, but it was recognized in deferred outflow in your reports on the previous year. So it was recognized appropriately from the accounting standard. It was just realized in your 22-23 ACFR.
And again, the market was not great in 22 and most of 23.
Right. And
When it cut off, and so.
Right, and we
So,
had
like, I think
the,
you say the next quarterly report is on 3/18, so hopefully that, since the fourth quarter of 23 was strong, we'll see
Right.
hopefully that the unfunded liability
if it performs strong, and
improve.
also the time period, right? I mean, we don't work on quarterly
Yeah.
results. It's on overall in
Oh, yeah,
the
the
smoothing of
annual,
these
yeah.
things, because you remember what people are telling you, wow, this payment process, you've saved the city $100 million over 20 years. Well, that $100 million savings will kind of get chipped if investments don't perform throughout the 20 and we smooth out, and we don't smooth out, right? It'll be a little less. Maybe you saved them $90 million, depending. We're hoping. But there's other factors, like right now, valuation and investment reports already came out. We're looking at them like we promised to bring them to the next meeting for you to give you that pulse check. And it's right now what we can see, 2.5.
So actually, I was able to pull they posted the reports and I brought the slide decks for the commission, if you'd like to see those after the meeting. But through December is 4.4%. But they were at minus 2.5 through Q1 in September. So that a stronger
Q4.
Stronger Q4, so that's through December is 4.
What was the performance at the end of the year? I missed that.
4.4%, you said?
4.4% through Q2 of this fiscal year,
Yeah.
through December of this fiscal year. But I was saying, as of September, they were at minus 2.5, so they had a strong
Swing.
quarter to pull it up. And I believe the representative, the investment representative from CalPERS said that they estimated at this point they would meet or
Exceed
slightly, exceed for the year. But again,
2 more quarters, but yeah.
yeah. But we can send the reports to you, and I printed out the presentations as well.
We got 2 more quarters, but we also have all the macroeconomic factors. We'll see how that year, because remember, I don't want to get this committee used to that quarterly performance, and you're going to bank on it and be like, oh man, it's going plummeting, right? We have an election year that's going to it's going to do something to the market. We don't want what, right? So again, just wanted to kind of smooth this out and understand the question that this committee is trying to answer, so we don't keep kind of, not giving you all the answers. But I think the answer you wanted to know is, did our payment post and hit and affect the liabilities like it should have? Yes, I can answer that for you without any, with full confidence. However, all the other variables that came into play, you'll never see this thing at 0 and you're like, okay, let's tick up from there and go, because of, again, what you've been noted here, the reporting periods. However, I think as we open this communication, which seems that maybe prior regime just didn't open this up to kind of clear it. And as we continue, you'll see, like you're getting now, investment performance ahead of time. You'll be able to see and keep track to where right now we're regurgitating back things that from 21 that you should have been clear on already, and hopefully we're adding that to get you a level of confidence there.
And just one point that I had was we're about, you said 92% funded in our total liability, but of that 8% that were underfunded, that you're saying that the majority of that came from underperformance of the investments, where otherwise we would have been closer
Yes.
to 0.
Yes.
We would have been super funded,
Right.
which is, overfunded if CalPERS had come anywhere close. And you remember it was about a
We lost-
minus
we lost 12
6.8.
We lost 12% to target in fiscal '22.
Yes,
We had -6, and we were looking for positive
6.8.
6.8, so
6.8.
say 13%. And then in 2023, we had about a 6 or 7% return.
For deficit?
Well, we were under, we were 13, we're 6 plus 6, and we were at about 0 in 2023, so we were 6% under then. So we lost to target in both fiscal '22 and '23.
Yep, back to back. So the up that you were anyway, that got decreased by the two negatives, right? That came in, right? So 6.8% is kind of like our target goal. We got to be there, because if not, if you see anything below that, we're paying.
so if in terms of just, adding to liability over time, if we started over today, we're a new city, we just joined CalPERS, we contribute based on what they calculate, and they hit 6.8 every year, 0 unfunded liability. So we incur unfunded liability when we lose assets compared to, the what we owe in terms of benefits.
Now, some other variables to add to that on the inverse of not being new but being existent is demographics.
People live longer.
Our population is going to age. We're going to get more pepper 3s, right? Tier 3s. That's going to change the variable of what we pay out, because the benefits that we're offering in those tiers are less than what we're offering. Eventually, unfortunately, it's a morbid way to say it, but people die off, and we're going to get into the tier 3, heavy on that side, which will bring some savings, unfortunately, right? In some weird way. Again, add that to the entire equation, right? Investment performance, contributions. What if the city, eventually decides that, this employee contribution has to increase in some way? We cannot continue to fund it the way we are and pay, a lot of variables could happen, but those are the key components to here. But I think, like I said, one of the connecting factors is when you've received ACFR, because you're coming off of a CalPERS investment, the reporting and timeframe and the purpose of that report hasn't really been explained from an accounting side, which makes it confusing. It's a lot of regurgitated information that you've received from investment to AC, moving quickly to ACFR, and then actual projections, right? Or actual performance. I digress. All right, one more slide?
Yep.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, one more question.
Yeah, the question, back to the previous slide, under the UAL, you're saying that the CalPERS calculation would show UAL at the end of fiscal '22 at the 44.9 plus the 118.5. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And I
Which
think
again-
that is what I would have trouble reconciling to, because we had planned to borrow enough money at the end of fiscal '21 to come to 0. And I don't think we incurred 163 million of net liabilities over returns in fiscal '22. So that part is what I'm having trouble understanding. We had a negative return to target of 13%. But did that generate 163 million of UAL? Then why do we show 163 million of UAL at the end of fiscal '22? That's what we're showing.
It is.
And I don't believe that that's true.
Was the calculation that you all looked at back then 2 years old? So you could have been looking at 19?
So
We had an estimate from CalPERS of what the UAL would be at the end of fiscal '21. That's how we came up with the 225 million. So we were guessing that we were funding the entire amount of UAL.
So again, the 163, the valuation report that was in, that data would have been as of 6/30/21, when the city had not yet made the payment. The city made the payment in July of '21. So the 163 million does not, it is prior to our payment.
Okay, so you're saying that was the end of fiscal '21, so.
Yes, 6/30/21. So again, we can go back and look at the reports because, again, not having been here, but the process is that the city would have gone to CalPERS and said, hey, CalPERS, what's this amount? They would have provided us an amount that would give us the payment.
But if
And it wouldn't necessarily match to our valuation.
So then that number is also not reflected in the July 2023 numbers that you have here.
It is reflected
It is
in July
reflected.
2023.
Well, we should have had a negative balance in 2023 based on how much we paid if,
Well, the end of fiscal '22 we should have had because we borrowed $225 million, expecting that to be the UAL. This figure shows that that figure was actually $163 million. That says we borrowed some
So
37 and 20, 60 million too much.
yeah.
And that doesn't make sense.
No, that you didn't borrow 60 million to my, remember what I told you, your net liability was not $225 million. You had administrative costs to broker that bond lease, all the charges totaled
That
up.
wasn't-
No,
that wasn't that
we
much.
gave CalPERS a bundle of money irrespective of all those brokerage charges and everything else that we paid.
So to clarify further, I mean, I think to really answer your question, Commissioner Woodham, I think we might need to give you, track back through these documents that you're looking for to provide you some reassurance that, all the documents that you're looking at reflect our payment accurately. I don't know that we're going to get there at this meeting because we don't have those documents in front of us. We're happy to do that. Again, we are very confident that CalPERS did not somehow not recognize and lose our money, and I'm sure we can go back and provide the documentation
I'm not worried
for
about
you.
that. I'm just worried about understanding the dollars and cents going forward. And
Yep.
on a cash basis, again, we were expecting the UAL to be in the range of 225 million at the end of fiscal 21. That's how we sized the bond issue. And the data so I'm addressing city council, explaining what we did versus using this data, and I can't do it because it doesn't show that at the end of fiscal 21 that we had a need to borrow 225 million. According to this, we only had a need to borrow 163 million, plus underwriters, concessions and so forth. But that doesn't change it from 163 to 225. That's roughly 5 to 10 million on that bond issue that we did.
Completely understood, and we will come back to you with a better explanation of this information that you're able to see clearly.
Okay, thanks.
So bottom line on these numbers that you have, how big is the check that the city of Redondo Beach has to write to CalPERS in September of this year?
That is a decision that will come up in the fiscal year 24-25 budget. I believe the total, off the top of my head, is around 3 million for the UAL payment that they recommend. I believe that's the number. Again, I'd have to go back as it's not in front of me. But that's the amount recommended, I believe, in our most recent valuation.
So the reason we floated a bond and we paid CalPERS $225 million is because it was costing us $5 to $10 million a year and going up prior to that bond issue, with the expectation that for the next several years, we would have no special allocations to CalPERS because we were going to be flat.
No, I remember the discussions. I remember Eugene and everybody, we all knew we were paying it. And even when the market was going down, we're like, we know it's not going to stay at zero.
Right.
We knew that there would be new unfunded liabilities
Right.
likely coming as we hire
Right.
new people and as the market kind of shifted, especially if it went down. So we knew that zero was not going to last long.
Right. But we also had the expectation that between the aging of our retiree population
Yeah.
and PEPRA and the payment that we were making, that we weren't going to, 2 years later, be back paying the same amounts that we were paying prior to paying off that liability.
We were paying what, like 6%, I guess, that 220? 6.8?
On the bond?
Like, before if we had left the 220 or 225, we were paying like
almost
7%.
6.8.
We borrowed sub 3, so we're arbitraging the 4%.
Yeah.
And that still goes, otherwise, if we hadn't paid it, we'd still be paying that plus the additional shortfall we have now. So our payments would be
Yeah.
bigger.
Agreed. But the shortfall part and the additional 3 million that we need to come up with.
Yep.
The idea, at least my understanding was, part of the idea was that by buying that down in the front end, that yes, we were going to have some other fluctuations. They would be in the range of $1 million a year.
Yeah, it's got worse than we thought, yes.
And somehow it's 3.
Yeah.
And I guess the next question is our surprise next year going to be, well, we're back at 6,
It could be.
9, or 11?
Quite honestly, it could be because we don't have a crystal ball to say, yeah, I mean, ideally, they told you that if the trend stays as it was, but there was a curveball, they don't know, and 3 million was your hit. And yes, you could be back to $6 million. And that is the risk
Yep.
that is taken when making such and bonding out, to make a payment because one, you're at an unfunded liability anyway that is higher than the industry standard anyhow, which is a great thing, right? But can you sustain it? Which should have been I'm not sure if this committee had the opportunity to ask that question when whatever bonding strategy came out. Could we sustain it if the market, because we don't know what the market's going to do, the market has a big impact. Like right now, we're 2.5% behind. If that continues on and goes deeper, it's a deeper cut. And yes, so the expectations won't come out to what was ideally would be the best scenario.
Yeah, keep in mind, Mel, to your question, in fiscal '21, CalPERS made 21%. So going through that year, that's one of the reasons we were optimistic that we were reducing UAL on an ongoing basis because we were beating what was then 7% return target. It was dropped into 6.8%, but in fiscal '23, they made negative 6.1. So that was the almost 13% negative that created a big amount of UAL. And I misquoted a moment ago. In fiscal '23, we made roughly 6%, but that was still under the 6.8, so there was a small amount. So in both of those years, we added to UAL in fiscal '22 by a big amount. But, and the 40 million that we have here is, I guess that's reasonable to think that could have occurred from that. The figure that, again, is troubling to me is the in-between figure, the end of fiscal '22. It's hard to believe it could be that large. But to the overall question of going forward, yeah, we are subject to the market. If we make 6.8% every year without ups and downs, then if we can start at 0, we won't increase UAL at all.
Correct.
But each year that we're under 6.8, we'll add to it. And each year that we're over 6.8, we'll reduce it.
Correct.
That's the math going forward. And it will be variable because the markets are variable and it'll vary from negative to negative 6 or 8 to positive 15 or 20. So we're going to see that kind of variability going forward without question. It's just the in-between numbers that I can't get a handle on, but we'll get there. So I'm not worried about that. It's just, that's the question, so.
And the only other cylinder the strategy of the city for the time being has always been that when the performance of the portfolio doesn't happen, the employer takes the hit. You've never tweaked up the employee contributions. And if you look at the gap, it's huge, right? But that is also, there's other factors tied to that, the attractiveness of the employer and everything. So there's bigger, footing there as well to consider. Other notes like, have been here, CalPERS is a big player in the game and everything. And remember, just like anything, any program, whether it be to end, start, there's upfront costs too that you would increase over. Also, your net pension liability adds a factor to the overall big picture of the city. While you created UAL because of the nature of the market and what its performance didn't happen, you put the city in a position that makes it strong. You're still AA rated, right? So when you're looking to broker capital and things of that nature, this did matter. And this is a big deal because you are in a seat, we are the only municipality this year that didn't have a true decrease comparative to everybody. We were in a different slot because of this. So I want to remind you of the value that it has, maybe not if we pigeonhole and go in weeds, but in the overall, it was unlikely that we were going to stay at zero forever. It was a whisper in a dream for a little bit, definitely. But the long term of what this committee did with this effort served the better of the whole. Pension is just one portion of it, but your standing as a city increased, and we are only looking to increase any better, and it's put the city in a situation where they're in the upside of being able, as far as their position, their net position as a city, they're in a good place.
And regardless of the volatility, the one thing is sure, over that 25-year period, we are in fact saving the city an average of $4 to $5 million per year.
Absolutely.
That again will vary year by year, depending upon how much is added to or reduced from UAL. But the math doesn't lie. Over that 25-year period, there's $100 million savings. Right. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think, like I said, some of the factors that we've added right now, as far as getting valuation reports and performance reports ahead of time, this is not going to be a surprise anymore to when you get a CalPERS rep. It's like, whoa, wait a minute, what happened? But we're telling you right now, 2.5, and we start calculating this up and trending this and being like, hey, 6.8 is our moneymaker right here, right? And if we are deficient by something, because we can track it, we can be aware of it now and in front of it as best as what we can do. We know some economic and macroeconomic factors that may do it, but again, we don't have that crystal ball, but we will be better tuned to give you that information ahead of time to where it's not, oh no, egads, what happened here? And, the evil CalPERS kind of thing, you know what I mean? I think, so slowly and surely, I think we're clarifying that with y'all.
So one of the questions that I think stimulated this discussion was, is CalPERS are they our best retirement vehicle? Or is there some other vehicle out there? Have you or your staff had a chance to investigate any of that? Is it based on, and we're in the middle of budget, so this is probably not the right time to look at it, but is that something that you would be willing to put on your radar and consider other investment alternatives that are, I'll call it more stable? And the reason I'm saying more stable is the fluctuation from -23 to +6 in a year's time. That's kind of a crazy fluctuation for almost any investment counselor. And is there something that's more stable so that we can rely on these numbers a little bit more and something that's a little bit more current rather than estimating or looking forward from numbers that are 2 years back? Is that a reasonable request, or is that a little bit too far outside the realm?
I'll be honest with you and tell you what I've done thus far and just my professional opinion. I did share this with the city manager, something that was pulsing around, just suggested. The idea of a committee looking into this from this committee, segregating out like a special project, he was definitely open to that, as because I don't ever want to shun off an idea. That, it's a possibility. CalPERS is one of the biggest in the game. And I think that, as far as performance, I don't think this is siloed to CalPERS, and their investment, performance is just, going to change because we go somewhere else. I actually don't know anybody at this point here in California that would be providing anything different or as robust as CalPERS. That's just my novice experience from what I've seen as far as a big hitter. On top of that, from a bandwidth, that is a huge, huge undertaking with what I feel is very big impacts on the side that we're normally not involved, which is the people side, right? Is what the benefits we've provided, the contributions that have already been made, the program itself, and that's a bigger decision for people way above me, but it is, I think, a huge undertaking that, given the bandwidth right now, absolutely, no, I'll be honest with you, I couldn't, but I think a committee to review that and provide some feedback, like the CM, has saw value in it when you guys did it with the bonds things and something happened. I think that's, if you guys would like to do that, that would be fantastic. I think that's, that presents options. But like I said, simple, an embryo research of it. I don't think it's something the city should leverage or needs to leverage at this point.
Fair enough, fair enough. I was just thinking of it in terms of if you take CalPERS versus investment firm B, if their 10-year net return is very similar, call it the same. But in the meantime, during those 10 years, we don't have these changes year to year that significantly impact our budget. It may be worthwhile to consider. It was just purely a flattening and smoothing kind of question, because I wouldn't expect us to find somebody else that says, oh, well, by the way, we can reduce your rates. But literally that we can manage our own annual budget even better.
So just as a quick point to CalPERS, because they actually do smooth the impact of both gains and losses. So in the year that they lost, they had the 21% loss, they would take the impact of that loss and spread that. I can't remember if it's over 5 or 10 years, but they'll smooth that out. So the cities are not having to kind of take the brunt of that every 5 years. And they do the same thing when we have large returns.
Okay.
So they'll take that and kind of smooth it out. So in years that, the fund's not doing as well, it kind of helps smooth it. So CalPERS is already doing that. They have these returns, as, I think many investors do, but they do have processes in place that smooth the impact for their clients.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
A couple of comments on that. Number one, we could find a portfolio structure that would lower the volatility of what we're seeing here. But the result of doing that would be to reduce our long-term expected return. We're trying to get 6.8%, and we've got to have some amount of risk in the portfolio in order to get there, because bonds don't give that on a long-term basis. Some regular equities don't give that. So they have to step into private equity and do a few things that add risk. That increases the volatility. So we could reduce volatility, but they would probably tell us, I've seen these kind of asset allocation studies, that instead of a 6.8% expected return, it might be closer to 6.5 or 6.25. So there's that trade-off. So unfortunately, I think the volatility that they have shown, horrific as it is in some years, is probably necessary in order to get that, because their target allocation is something like 60 or 70% equities and 30, 40% fixed income. That's not a particularly aggressive asset allocation long-term. To the point of using someone else, we could probably find a money manager who would take I think we've got 200 million, 250 million in basically in CalPERS. We could turn it over to them, and some years they'd beat CalPERS, some years they'd lose to CalPERS. One of the things they wouldn't give us is if they underperform, CalPERS has a mechanism for Redondo Beach funding that underperformance. The UAL that we're talking about here, that they're basically financing, is the way to do that. If we'd go to Fidelity or Vanguard and say, manage our $300 million,
Yeah.
$300 billion, if we underperformed, they come to us and ask for a check to make that up. There's no, with a typical money manager, there is no way of funding that sort of a deficit. So we're getting more than simple money management from CalPERS. We're getting portfolio management, or we're getting a layer of benefit over and above what a typical money manager would give us. So now, having said that, if you follow CalPERS in the press, there are some valid criticisms of the way they have managed money management. And that's why we need to see them on an annual basis and be able to provide input and complaints if we have them, and applause if they do well. And that's a policy we've instituted going forward, and that'll serve us well in the future, I think.
One idea that I had that might be another way to address this sort of issue for us as a city over a long-term basis, I think when we do our budget of what this expense line is, we budget to them making 6.8% and we 100% fund that number. Should we, in terms of our budgeting, should we budget to pay 105%, let's just say, of what that number would be? So we build in some reserve for ourselves so that if there is a bad year, we sort of have some cushion built into our budget number? Is that a better?
That's what I was going to suggest, to try to look at it from a different angle, right? Because where we have true control, right? 6.8, I don't, other than the performance of the portfolio. But if we robust our policy to create a reserve strategy for the UAL that could happen, which is going to take a bit to build. It's not going to happen overnight. But if we think of it from a strategy approach of every dollar in, how much portion of that goes into some form of a reserve policy, right, for these items, right? That could be a strategy. I would suggest that would be something we can control. Like I said, it wouldn't build immediately, but it also gives some transparency to our residents to know that for every dollar we earn, where is it going? Where is it being spent? Because most people always think we're, buying the Ferraris and spending huge amounts on all this stuff, and they don't realize the house bills we have, which are pretty extensive. I would suggest that. I think that's one of the parts we're doing anyway as we update APPs and policy and procedure here in the city. But I would suggest that because I think that's a great way to see it. Again, it would not be an immediate, but we work towards that to really give that approach to say, kind of be prepared for, many cities have, I hate to call it a rainy day fund, but a restricted purpose, on our reserve policy and make it more robust. I would definitely think that that's possible, right?
We have a reserve fund for pension liabilities, don't we?
Yep.
Yes.
Is it just that we don't have a policy for how to fund it?
Yeah, it's just for like UAL, like, pivots and things of that nature. Yeah, and I think editing that to kind of make it more, I guess, clear with purpose, where it's going, for what purposes and intents, that would help, you know what I mean? So,
Well, it's a reserve fund for pension liabilities, but it sounds like from what you're saying, we don't have a policy that talks about
How we're
our
contributing to
policy
it.
and strategy for how we're going to fund it
Yep.
moving
right,
forward.
right, a strategy,
Okay.
yes, correct.
Okay.
Because one of the issues in the CalPERS report, if I remember correctly, our target is 6.8%, but I want to say their 5-year return might have been 6 or 6.1, 6.2, so it was definitely under the 6.8.
Right.
And one of the concerns that I had is that what if instead of over a 20-year period being 6.8, what if over a 20-year period it ends up just being 6?
Right.
So we don't want to wake up, 15 years from now and have underperformed for 20 years and have a monstrous liability. Something we should do is probably start reserving just in case. And if we have that money that's overfunded or superfunded, we can do something else with it, but we won't be caught
Exactly.
in a tough spot.
And that was the reason for the reserve fund in the first place, because we had the reserve fund set aside, have it set aside, because every year we knew that September, we had this big lump that we had to spend. So it became part of the budget that we were going to set money aside, knowing that 3 months later, it was going to get pulled out.
Right.
And it was kind of a guesstimate. How do we go about creating a policy for that? Who does that, and how do we come up with that?
So that would be us.
Okay.
Or
I
their
believe-
correct finance department.
So, I think what we would do is we'd kind of research different options. A lot of cities have these policies, a lot of ideas out there, and probably present that through the budget process or through another process, obviously working with our city manager and our team. But yeah, that's definitely something we could put forward proposals for. We could also consider a Section 115 trust. So this is something we have for our other post-employment benefits, our OPEB. So it's similar to what we're doing, except we just put the money in an actual restricted fund. And in some cases, we could then invest that at a higher rate than we're getting, with just the city's regular investments. I think at this point, that may not be as attractive, given that, just our regular investment return is a little higher than it would has been in prior years. But that's another option that we could look at if we're just thinking how to manage.
Well, with the volatility that we have here, I'm not sure how that restricted fund might work, but I trust you to look into the alternatives and figure out what the funding looks like. I would fully support doing exactly that, because this is one of the places that on an annual basis, it's a topic of discussion. How much do we have to spend on CalPERS and how much do we have to take out of the Parkland Conservancy? So it's something that I think we really need to do. And I would fully support it.
Like I said, we definitely could and talk to the city manager to obviously put him in the loop, get his input, you know what I mean? Because like I said, just from a peripheral, just looking over as we go through different policies that are either needing update from, like I mentioned earlier, 1976, and you making them robust and up to current 21st century, practices. We would look into that, get this committee to review it, and champion it, but I think it would be great to also have a strategy, because like you said, the CalPERS like reserve, we have it there. But then what happens is after a while, it's nice to look at that amount there and then we don't, like do we use it, do we not, defining that, what categorical. And then, like I said, I'm being on top of the curve. So we can definitely put that on the docket as it has been, with all the policies that we're updating as we, continue kind of streamlining everything.
And if we want to go to the final slide, I think this transitions nicely. There's not too much on here, but it's just next steps, which again is that, we'll continue to keep you updated. We've seen these numbers, but I'll share the reports with you after the meeting. We can send those to you. And then just that you'll be hearing about pension ongoing in court, including in our 24-25 budget preparation. And should be well ahead of the curve and having, a lot of discussions about this to date. But yeah, so we'll discuss that in the budget, including potentially some of these policy options. And then we will be receiving our very exciting CalPERS valuation in July of 24. So
That's right.
have that to look forward to.
I think we get to, not only with all the reporting coming out, we get to use this nifty scenario calculator that we're excited to use, where you can, throw this and kind of make it our own to see how it would really affect us. It'll be interesting to see what that result does. And, Stephanie and I will be kind of geeking out to that a little bit and nerding out and providing you some results as far as what that does, what that says. It's always fun to see some scenarios. So, and we will share that with the committee as well.
Are there any other questions? Okay, thank you so much. Do I have a motion to receive and file this report? Second? Oh, are there any comments?
Yeah, before we do that, there are no e-comments and there's no participants on Zoom.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, if you could do a roll call.
Sure. Commissioner Jesty? Commissioner Marin?
Aye.
Chair Castle?
Aye.
Commissioner Woodham?
Aye.
Commissioner Samples?
Aye.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, are there any member items or referrals to staff?
I have one, just in spite of the back and forth and the complaints over this or that, be aware that we're very appreciative of the job you guys are doing and the effort you're putting into new areas like this where we've not been able to take a hard look before. That's very refreshing and necessary for the city. And I, for one, applaud both of you for the work you're doing.
We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having us earn our A.
Any other items? Okay. All right, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Meeting's now adjourned.
Thank you.
You got to laugh that one time.
I have to get a picture without the head on it, so that I can.
Are we done?
We are finished.
I think we have to do it that way.
Don't tell our chair, but